Productivity is everything, and you know that. You just might not know that you know that. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and we need to talk about productivity. We all understand instinctively that on average, we all need to produce at least as much in our lifetime as we consume. Otherwise, if we don't, we run out of stuff. We get poorer or we go broke. As a civilization, you can predict the future of a civilization based on whether each person in that civilization is, on average, producing more than they consume or consuming more than they produce. In fact, we have what we have today, all the technology, the infrastructure, everything that was left to us by previous generations, we have that because they produced more than they consumed. And I know people decry consumerism, consumer economy. Oh, I'm not a consumer. No, actually, we're all consuming all the time. And that's not a capitalism thing, that's a being alive thing. You are wearing out the clothes on your back, you've put food in your belly, you've drunk clean water that had to be made drinkable and safe for you to drink. Over the course of your lifetime, you're going to wear out probably 2 houses, 5 cars, eat thousands of meals, hundreds, if not thousands of items of clothing are going to be worn through and destroyed, pairs of shoes, all kinds of things. And that's to say nothing of the electricity and technology and phones and everything else that you are going to consume. And that's not as someone who's unreasonable and irresponsible, that's just life. And if, on average, we all produce or create more value in the world than we consume, then we leave the world a wealthier place than it was when we came into it. If, on the other hand, we consume all of those things and we don't really produce any value to replace those things, then actually we've left the world a poorer place than it would have been. And we all understand this. You're sitting there going, yes, yes, Topher, I know. What are you on about? Why does this matter? Well, it matters because this is actually the single most important equation in the universe when it comes to the human experience. Because what it means is that if we can change things in a way, like inventing new technologies, that allow humans to produce more with the same amount of inputs, so per hour of work, per amount of steel, per amount of electricity, if we can find ways to produce more with less, particularly less human input, less hours on the part of a human, then we can increase productivity. And that is the key to wealth. Anything that enables more productivity per person makes us all richer on average because the gap between what we're able to produce and what we need to consume is actually getting larger. So, one of the funny things, though, when we invent those technologies that allow us to do more with less, is that in the short term, they cost jobs. So, for example, when steam power was all the rage and machines were taking over in factories, you used to have row upon row of humans doing these manual labor tasks at table after table. And now machines were coming in that could do it faster. And you only needed 2 or 3 or 5 people to run a bank of machines instead of 50 people to do the same amount of work. But it'll cost jobs. These people are going to be out of a job. Well, yes, that's true for those individuals, but productivity as a result is going up. You understand, you can't have one without the other. And what's interesting is government love to boast about how many jobs they're going to create. Well, we're going to transition across to renewable energy and it's going to create 20,000 new jobs. Well, but doesn't that just mean that it's less efficient energy? If we used to be able to produce a certain amount of energy with a small number of jobs, and now to produce the same amount of energy, we need thousands more jobs, doesn't that just mean you're being less efficient? Doesn't that just mean that it now requires more to go into the same amount of productivity? We're actually getting poorer as a result. So it's counterintuitive, but that very thing that people object to and say, oh, but it'll cost jobs, that is the very thing that has made us as rich as we are today. It's a short term pain, long term gain thing. Let me prove it to you. It used to be that farming required, just producing food for us to eat, required about 90% of our productive labor. You go back 300, 400 years, and the peasants and the serfs were working the land constantly. Then you had a very small number of middle class, tradespeople. These were the metal workers or the woodworkers or the builders, the cabinet makers. They were a very small number of people. Then you had the landowners and the wealthy, the ruling class. The vast majority of the population were literally making food for themselves and for that small number of other people. 90% of the workforce was involved in making food. And what that meant was that food cost you nearly an entire day's wages. You would work 90% of your day to produce enough food for yourself, and then you would have to, that last little bit of the day, you're working for the other things that you need to replace the clothes on your back, the furniture that's wearing out or breaking, the house that you live in. You were working almost your entire life just for the food that you needed to put into your belly each and every day. That's the reality. When 90% of the workforce is just making food, that means that on average, food is costing everyone 90% of their incomes. Obviously different for the very rich, but I'm talking about for the main mass of humanity. But then along came mechanization, and now farmers well, I believe it's about 3% now are actually directly involved in producing our food. And I think if you then extend that out to some of the logistics, etc., it's about 7% of our entire workforce that is actually directly involved in feeding us. And that means that actually, on average, as a species now, it's only about 7% of our income that has to be spent on food. Now, lots of people love luxury items, food items, etc., and choose to spend more than that. And I know cost of living right now, this is not a time when people want to hear that food is actually super duper cheap, but historically speaking, it is. Historically speaking, food is as cheap as it has ever been, with the caveat perhaps of about 20 years ago. That's about the only time in history where food might have been cheaper than it is now. And the reason it's gotten more expensive is because government has made us less and less efficient. We have to keep on doing more and more work to produce the same amount of food because farmers are now lumbered with all kinds of restrictions on their irrigation water, all sorts of green tape on their land, all sorts of rules and regulations over how things have to be processed and stored and labeled, and all of that adds inefficiency. All of that means more work has to go in for the same amount of productivity, and that means that we are being made poorer. My point is that that very thing that cost most of those serfs, most of those peasants their jobs, that 90% of the population that used to work in food production, the very technology that kicked most of them out of that job is the technology that enabled us to live the way that we do today, where food is actually a relatively speaking, historically, small proportion of our weekly or daily cost. But what happened to all those serfs? What happened to all those people? Did they stay out of work forever? Well, no, because as the cost of living comes down, people can start to spend their time doing things that they would rather do, and that includes careers that they would rather do. The number of people working, for example, in entertainment today is extraordinary. Why? Well, because people consume extraordinary amounts of entertainment. How can we afford to be being entertained all of the time? Well, actually, because historically speaking, again, we live in an incredibly prosperous time where we can think about things like entertainment, watching TV, listening to the radio, watching videos online. This is a historically bizarre time where we are so rich that we are surrounded by entertainment and options continuously, and yet, right now, we have people complaining about how hard life is and about how unfair it is that the rich are so rich and they are ever so poor. We'll come back to that poverty issue in just a minute, but think about the way that the world has changed since the invention of steam and steam engines and steam tractors became internal combustion, became mechanization, became computerization. Think about all of the jobs that have been destroyed time and time again as that progression of technology has happened. And realize that every time technology comes in and replaces jobs, it is enabling people to become more efficient. A solo business operator sitting on their own with a laptop or even just a phone can now do more in a day than a team of 20 people used to be able to do 100 years ago, before telephones and emails and all of that computerization and spreadsheets, etc. Individuals now can be incredibly productive. Why? Because we have technology that allows us to do that. That means that a lot of people got put out of work. People used to work in the typing pool. Now everyone knows how to touch type, or at least they should. If you don't, you should learn. People used to have a career as a driver. Cars, the thought of driving your own car was ridiculous. Only the very wealthy owned cars, and it came with a driver. That was a specialized profession. And the idea that ordinary people would be driving cars and operating that kind of machinery was absurd. And yet that's exactly the world that we live in today. That technology made it possible for us to become infinitely more productive. And over time, the jobs that were created by the new technologies then became the jobs that were destroyed by the following technologies, and so on it goes. What that means, because we've produced so much over the last 250 years since the Industrial Revolution kicked off, we've produced so much more than we've consumed, that we today live the best lives in all of human history possibly excluding a minor downturn in the last 5 or 10 years, which is a direct result of government intervention. That's a subject for another video. We are historically incredibly wealthy, and I can prove it. Would you, if you might be, I don't know who you are, you might be someone who's one of the working poor, you might be working hard, working flat out, trying to make ends meet, balancing the budget every month, or you might be a retiree trying to live on a fixed income, and it's tricky out there, or you might be someone who's in really quite a good position. It actually doesn't matter. You would never, no matter who you are, you do not want to swap with the richest person from 150 years ago. Look up Cornelius Vanderbilt, the richest man in the world, died in, I believe, 1877. Have a look at the technology that was available when he was alive and ask yourself, would you want to swap with him? There's no such thing as a painkiller. There's no aspirin. There's nothing else for a headache or a hangover. There are no telephones, there's no air conditioning, there are no cars for you to travel in. In fact, you are living a life that is full of peril, full of diseases that can't be properly managed. A simple cut from a rose bush can be fatal in the world in which you now live. Child mortality is extraordinary compared to what it is today. The world lives in squalor and poverty in comparison, and even you, as the richest man in the world, would not live a life that is comparable to the one that you enjoy today, even as someone who is relatively poor. And I can say that with confidence because if you have access to the internet and a device to watch the internet on, then you are an extraordinarily wealthy person by historical standards, whether you believe it or not. And this is why the left of politics, your communists, your socialists, etc., they love to focus on inequality. They talk about how much the rich are getting richer, because if they talked about how rich the poor are today, compared to what the poor used to be like 200 years ago, they would have to admit that capitalism, the incentive to produce, because you get to keep the effort, the rewards for the efforts of your labor. If you produce money, you get to keep that money. That's the beauty of capitalism. That's the incentive. The profit motive incentivizes people to produce. And that motive over the last 200 years has made even poor people richer than the richest man was 150 years ago. And we know that's true because there is no way in hell you would want to swap with him if you ever had the opportunity. You would not want to swap with him because productivity today enables a quality of life and a standard of living that was unimaginable back then, even for the richest man in the world. And the technology today has simply no replacement. There is nothing in the world that nothing could entice you to give up instant communication, travel in air conditioning in a car on well-paved roads. What's going to make you give up Panadol on a morning when you wake up with a headache? Are you really going to give that up? I don't think so. We live incredibly wealthy lives today. Okay. Here are a few of the objections that come up when I talk about this. People say, "Oh, but this is different now with AI and all these really advanced tools. Ordinary people aren't going to know how to use them. They're not going to be able to make their lives better with this technology. This is technology that's going to kind of happen to us rather than be a tool in our hands for us to then use." Well, actually, no. I mean, no more so than it was with the steam revolution. Ordinary peasants couldn't afford steam engines. They were something being installed by rich people in factories for peasants to work on. But the fact that it made the peasants so much more productive then over time meant that wages rose, quality of life rose because productivity rose. It's going to be the same thing with things like AI. People won't be able to use it. Well, that's what they said about cars. That's what they said about typewriters. That's what they said about everything. And yes, there may be a transition period where it's a specialist occupation to operate AI. There might be AI specialists in the world, but it will ultimately get integrated into our lives and become a very normal part of everyday life where we are all using and taking those tools for granted the same as we all use and take our phones for granted today. Now, we are all machine operators today. And one of the objections to something like AI is that it's only going to enrich those who own the AI companies. But think about Amazon. Think about Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Yes, one of the richest men in the world. Oh, Amazon just enriched him. Did it though? I mean, it did enrich him. No argument there. I mean, did the rich get richer? Yep, sure. That absolutely happened. But actually, an awful lot of poor people got richer too, in a multitude of different ways. Sometimes as shareholders, if you own shares in Amazon, you can partake in the profits of that company. Yeah, okay, you can only buy a few shares because you don't have truckloads of money lying around, but you can still benefit from the technology, from Amazon being this dominant, monopolistic, conglomerate, multinational, evil corp, whatever you want to call them. The fact is, you can own your little slice of it if you want to, but even if you don't, you actually benefit. You become richer as a customer. Yes, as a customer, you're making Jeff Bezos richer because you're putting money into his company, but why do you buy from Amazon? Well, because it's cheaper, or because the product is better, or because you know where to find the product and you don't have to waste time looking for it, or because it can be delivered in time and it can't from the other place where you could get it from. Whatever the reason is, there's a reason you're buying from Amazon. So even as a customer, you're better off now than you would have been if Amazon didn't exist. And for me, I use Amazon to print my books. And as a result of using Amazon, anyone in the world can buy my book and have it delivered to their door by Amazon, and I don't have to do a thing. I've just got the listing page up on Amazon. Anyone can go there, click on it, Good People Break Bad Laws, search for it on Amazon, or go to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com if you want it to come from me personally. But I can now deliver and service clients and customers all over the world without any infrastructure of my own, without any upfront cost of my own. That wasn't possible before Amazon. So, yeah, Amazon made the rich richer. Jeff Bezos got richer because of Amazon. That's true. But there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of artists, creators, writers, small business owners who are now able to do things thanks to Amazon that they could not do before Amazon came out. The same is true of AI. Will AI make the owners of the AI companies richer? Yes, it will. Absolutely. Will AI also make the life of the common man and woman more convenient and better in a whole host of different ways? Yes, it will. They're the consumers at the consumer end using it because it's cheaper, faster, better, more accurate, whatever it may be about the AI services that are offered. But then in the middle, there's all these entrepreneurs, these business owners, these business people that are saying, hey, I can use AI to do this thing better, faster, cheaper, to serve my clients in a better way. And yes, they are helping to enrich the owners of the AI companies, but also they're actually enriching themselves because they're using that technology to increase their productivity. AI is just another productivity tool, same as the Industrial Revolution, same as the internal combustion engine, same as the telephone, same as all of these technologies. Productivity matters. And anything that is good for productivity is ultimately good for humanity. It is good for our standard of living because it allows us, on average, to produce even more, which means that it allows us, on average, to consume even more, which is just another way of saying to have a higher quality of life. Now, is AI a technology that needs to be watched to make sure that people don't weaponize it and use it for oppression? Absolutely. That's why I'd rather it be in private hands rather than government hands. I trust people who want my money far more than I trust people that want to control me. I would much rather see these sorts of technologies in private hands than public ones, but that's an argument for another day. The fact is, the AI revolution is upon us and it's not going anywhere. And actually, from a productivity point of view, it's a really good thing. That is very good news for us all, even though it might make us a little uncomfortable. And even though in the short term it's going to cost some people their jobs, I'm sorry, you're going to have to retrain, you're going to have to reskill, you're going to have to find a new occupation. Because for us to save your jobs would be to literally try and hold back the hand of progress and specifically the hand of productivity. And to do that hurts us all. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project. Thanks for watching.